Report, and of course the first hour on Wednesdays we have the LaRouche Foundation, and usually Harley Schlanger is the main pundit that's out there to disentangle the Gordian knot of news. As I've said jokingly to Harley before the show, I am sitting on the edge of the bowl of the world toilet and watching the swirling news heading toward the bottom and out into evacuation. It is pretty bad, and there's some good twists on it though. And there's some disentanglements that Harley will do that make it actually a lot simpler to solve the problems than we assume. So, Harley, let's get into it.
Well, I won't respond with disgust at having been called a pundit by you. But let me start with...
by pundit, you're not really a pundit. You're a geopolitical knot untier. How's that?
Well, let me put it this way. I'm with Lyndon LaRouche, and Lyndon LaRouche has been the one person over 40 years who's consistently identified the causes of the crisis and the solutions. And what people need to know about LaRouche is there were two times where he was very much involved at the center of U.S. policy. One was when Ronald Reagan brought him in 1982-83 to negotiate what became the Strategic Defense Initiative with the Russians. LaRouche did that as a representative of Reagan. And the idea was to get out of a thermonuclear war confrontation into an area of cooperation on high-tech and scientific development. The second time he was brought in was when Bill Clinton in 97-98 was trying to deal with the collapse of the Asian countries in 1997 by Soros's speculative attacks on them. And the line coming out was, you have to bail them out, bail them out. And Clinton said, no, we're not going to bail them out. They're going to have to adopt policies, but we have to do something different from what the International Monetary Fund is doing of austerity. And then in 1998, when the Russian bonds collapsed and we nearly had the September 2008 collapse because of the LTCM crisis, again, Clinton was listening to LaRouche, who told him we need a new financial architecture. Now, Clinton could never do that because that's, I think, one of the reasons that the whole Monica Lewinsky thing, the string was pulled on that to prevent Clinton from going with LaRouche. Now, what's happened since 1998 is that most of the rest of the world is caught up with what LaRouche was saying about the transatlantic system, which is a free trade, deregulated, privatized system, is designed to loot the whole world on behalf of 1% of the population and their banks. And so we have a whole new system coming into existence with the Russians, the Chinese, and others. And we need to get in on that. The United States does, because our transatlantic system is headed toward collapse. And the only way to do that is to get rid of Obama. Now, LaRouche came up with an additional idea this week that will help us get rid of Obama. And it's one I know you'll like because we've talked about this before plenty of times. It's that we've got to get rid of John Boehner first.
So if you were looking at the operating room list, we would see first in the morning at 7:15 a.m., Boehner-ectomy, 8 o'clock, Obama-nectomy.
I mean, Boehner is the impediment to getting Obama, the same way Eric Cantor was. Now, Eric Cantor was dealt with by his voters. But, you could remove the Speaker of the House very easily. In the House rules, they say if a Speaker is violating the dignity of the House, he can be removed. And both parties vote on it. A lot of Republicans don't like Boehner, and most Democrats don't like him. If we got rid of Boehner, that would open the door to impeaching Obama. Now, instead of this helping Obama, I'm convinced once the story of all his corruption and his frauds and his attacks on the Constitution came out for people to see it, that it wouldn't be long before Obama was gone.
Right. And yeah, he's a nidus. He's the kind of the center point. He's the head of the dragon. He's the biting teeth of the snake. Because once we remove those, defang the New World Order, people like Valerie Jarrett, who really are running the White House, then we have a situation where logic can rule, where we can start making reasonable deals with Russia and China on space exploration, helium fusion technology, limitless supercomputer access for teenagers and young people around the world, and third world countries even. The idea of protecting planet Earth from destruction from the ozone layer degradation. And it's primarily being degraded by the U.S. Missile Defense Command, use of nanoparticles in near space and the upper troposphere, and of course Fukushima Daiichi, which we're doing nothing about, and now the intertidal region in British Columbia and the Georgia Strait is dying or dead. And all of these things are happening.
Once you get rid of Obama,
it all can happen, I'll confess.
The one person who is pushing Wall Street and City of London policies. Right. We could get Glass-Steagall and take the power away from these bankers. Now, then what we would need, and this is what we can talk about today, I think it's really interesting, what would be the combination of forces in the United States which could carry out the four basic laws that LaRouche has identified, banking, credit policy, Glass-Steagall, infrastructure development, and fusion. What kind of coalition could we put together? And I think it's interesting because you could put together between progressives, between libertarians, people like Ron Paul, you actually could put together a governing coalition. And
right.
That's what we need to do. But to do it, we got to get rid of Boehner and Obama first.
Yeah, that's a must. I think that surgical list makes sense to me. So the operating room senior charge nurse would agree and put it on the schedule.
Well, if it's that simple, what we have to do is make sure that enough Americans are calling that senior nurse to make sure it's put on the schedule. Yeah. Because
by the way, it doesn't even need an anesthesiologist; it just needs a local anesthetic to remove Boehner. Now, Obama may require a general anesthetic, and according to Michael Connolly from the U.S. Justice Foundation, the articles of impeachment are already sitting there. It's his opinion that it probably won't happen until after the midterm elections, but I think that if we start the process now, it'll tilt things in a direction where real Democrats that are Americans and real Republicans that are Americans first will start to come together and try to bring America back from the brink of destruction. Because, the rearrangement, for example, even of the trade between Russia and Europe is killing the fruit and vegetable industry in Europe, because now they're finding new markets to obtain their produce. It's putting Germany in danger of having its oil and gas either tripled in price or cut off. It's putting in danger the Middle East in terms of starting a regional war that will make it impossible to get oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. It is just aggravating the heck out of the Russians who want to deal with space exploration and to get rid of the drug trade that's killing their young people. And all the collaboration in space weaponry, in space exploration and new advanced technology with the best physicists on Earth, which are Russian, is down the drain now because of the idiocy of Obama and the bankers.
And let me just say one thing quickly before we go to break. Getting rid of a speaker is not too tough. You may remember when within a period of about 6 weeks, Newt Gingrich and then his replacement, Representative Livingston from Louisiana, both were dumped. 2 speakers within 6 weeks. Yeah. So it's not so hard to remove a speaker. It's not so hard to remove a president either who's committed these many crimes. The problem is that as long as Boehner bottles it up, the Republicans are going to have inane, stupid, impotent lines like, we won't win because we don't have the votes.
Yeah, no,
you go organize the votes. You show the American people what a criminal this president is so that the Democrats are forced to join with the Republicans to throw him out, as was happening in 1974 when Nixon resigned.
Right. I think there's enough decency in the population that if you give them the option to have actual real choices, and you start being forthright instead of politicking every issue, which is what Boehner's trying to do, you'll have a situation where the American public will rise up and say, you know what? We need a new speaker. We need a new president. We need an American first. We don't care what their, quote, label is, Democrat, Republican. We want one that stands up for America first.
And the only problem with Lyndon LaRouche is he's too old. He's 92 now. But he can certainly be there to guide whoever comes in.
His wisdom is still there. He doesn't need to have his hand on the control. He just needs to tell him which road to turn right and left on, like a geopolitical world GPS system. How's that? He doesn't need to be the driver. Back in a moment. Welcome back, and we are here swashbuckling, how can I say, patriots chopping away at the lies. The lies are actually not very hard. They don't have titanium coating. They just require a nice sharp blade to cut at them. They just fall away like the tentacles of a very large, giant squid. You just take a butter knife and they literally fall away. It just takes a real effort to actually be willing to say, Well, we'll suffer a little persecution and a little harassment. And I was just talking about this before on the break, that because Lyndon LaRouche would not sell out America and Americans, he spent 5 years in a Rochester prison put there by Mr. Bush. Completely illegally and unethically, even though the man is brilliant. If they had followed his ideas, NWAP and North American Water and Power would have been done. We would probably already have nuclear fusion technology taken out of Warehouse 13 instead of boiling water with nuclear fission. We would probably have safety around our nuclear plants, and Fukushima, which was contracted by American contractors, would never happen. We wouldn't have a whole lot of stuff that's going on, including our foreign policies that are getting us entangled in a pre-war
stance. We never would have had Bush or Obama, but, that's precisely the point. What Lynn represented in his mobilization in the 1980s was something that came out of his study of the American system and great leaders like George Washington, John Quincy Adams, Lincoln, and FDR and John Kennedy. This idea that, number one, after what we saw with the destructive power of atomic weapons, you can never fight wars again. Fighting wars, the idea if you're going to have a limited war, it's just a meat grinder. We've been this is now our third war in Iraq since 1991.
It's a meat grinder war. And by the way, these wars, now they've lived under the delusion that the war can be contained and won't expand from a proxy war to a general or complete global war. It's not true. This war, for example, that we continue to pull Russia into, will eventually result in American cities on fire with people holding their hands up to see their bones for the last time. This will see cities vaporize into atomic dust.
This is what we were faced with after the Jimmy Carter administration, where under Brzezinski there was a forward deployment doctrine called the Arc of Crisis, of deploying Islamic militant regimes on the southern border of the Soviet Union as a way to try and defeat the Soviet Union. At the same time, we were putting in tactical nuclear weapons into NATO forces in Western Europe. And it was at that point that LaRouche went to the Reagan administration, and said, look, there's a way out of this. He wrote something in 1978 called Sputnik of the 80s, where he talked about using new physical principles with electron beams and lasers and targeting that became the basis of the SDI. The idea of using these new physical principles as opposed to anti-missile missiles. And Reagan liked the idea, and that's why Reagan brought LaRouche in as of the winter of 1982 to negotiate with the Soviets. And LaRouche was meeting with Russian Defense Ministry people and with Russian generals.
Right.
Now, what happened is that's when Henry Kissinger got together with a really terrible guy named Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a Democrat, and they went to Reagan and said, you've got to stop talking to LaRouche. And when Reagan wouldn't shut down the connection, they went to the floor of the Congress. Moynihan attacked Reagan for working with LaRouche, Moynihan called him a neo-Nazi. The right-wingers in who were tied to the Kissinger networks were calling LaRouche a communist agent. So depending on which side of the Hall of Congress you were on, you either heard he was a communist or a Nazi. But what they had in common was they wanted to stop the SDI. And who were they working with to stop the SDI? Andropov and Gorbachev, the dictators of the Soviet Union.
Right. And by the way, the SDI program should have been 95% aimed for objects coming in from near space. It should be for protection of the planet's magnetosphere and climate, which is related to the UV, which is now increasing like a monster. 23
and as
years
a collaboration between U.S. and Russian scientists, which
exactly.
it was at that point.
Now, instead, also what they've done, and this is, by the way, from the same time period, after they nearly assassinated Ronald Reagan, this was, by the way, a George Bush special, senior.
Yep.
George H.W. Bush special, because he's a CIA operative. This is the CIA op. The same, by the way, George Bush Sr. was the one who recruited Saddam Hussein on the streets of Baghdad. The same man who was in Dealey Plaza stage managing the assassination of President Kennedy. And we need to understand what's really going on here is we've been having a sequential globalist takeover of the presidency. We do not have a U.S. president. We have a proxy of globalist British, Londonistan, I call it, from London, power. That's what we have. We do not have a presidential office. We have a crawling bureaucracy that's taken over and tried to neutralize the judicial branch or opt them and to make them just prostitutes, and to make it vestigial, the Congress and the Senate. And with Boehner, for example, is a good example. He's made the entire operation of the Republican Congress useless.
Well, and you know, it is so totally useless. It's amazing that people who consider themselves Republicans don't see this.
They should. They should be enraged by Boehner, and the same with the Democrats that are blue dog, especially Christian Democrats that call themselves concerned about America and people. What the heck are they doing supporting someone like Obama?
Well, here's what's interesting. There are many Republicans holding town meetings, and our supporters are going to them and saying, why are you here in the district? Why aren't you in Washington? Because Obama is now violating the War Powers Act, and he's about to get us into a war, and it's your responsibility, not the president's responsibility, to discuss this, debate it, and make the decision.
Well, if they deploy more tanks and if they deploy more tanks and material in Iraq, they'll be in direct conflict with Iran and Russia.
But we're already in direct conflict with the Constitution, because as shifted by the War Powers Act, once Obama notifies the Congress that he's taking some action, he has 60 days to go to the Congress and get their approval. Right. And 60 days was 3 days ago.
By the way, 3 weeks ago, they had a resolution by joint Democrat and Republicans that required him to come within a certain number of days, and they passed the resolution, that 60-day resolution. That is now at the point where he's already crossed the line.
Well, that was an overwhelming vote. 180 Democrats and 170 Republicans voted. It's called HCR, House Concurrent Resolution 105, where the Democrats and the Republicans in the House said to the President, you must come before us under the conditions of the War Powers Act. And this was to make up for what happened in Libya, where Obama violated the War Powers Act with the connivance of now Secretary of State John Kerry and his good partner John McCain, the pair of Johns, who, after Vietnam, they were on different sides. Kerry was anti-war, McCain pro-war, but now they're together.
Yeah, I know. That's a good term for them, Johns, because I guess when you catch the consort of a prostitute, they're called a John, and I guess that's what these guys are.
A pair of Johns.
A pair of Johns. Back in a moment. With Harley Hardy, we explored a few issues, and the first question number one is, has any terrorism occurred coming out of Iran against the West? The answer is zero. Has there been really significant evidence, including hidden pages by Mr. George Bush, the idiot, who was our president before the Abominator, that he should have released that would have made it very clear that the Saudi Arabians, as well as the Israeli Mossad nuclear division, were directly involved in 9/11? No, they're not going to do that. They're not going to tell you that the Wahhabists, supported by Britain, which is over 100 years ago, supported by Britain, in fact, the Wahhabist schools of extreme Islam were founded not in Saudi Arabia or in Jeddah. They were founded in London. That's why I call it Londonistan. It's incredible. The globalists have made an alliance between the global evil, Sabbatean, Satanistic bankers in London and these Wahhabist Satanists in Saudi Arabia, and they're exporting all of this all over the place. And what the Turks, who are very pragmatists, say, and they're kind of trying to play all sides, and it's not going to work. They're even internally, the reason why Mr. Erdogan got reelected is he told his own population, we're not going to play ball with the Saudi Arabians or these Wahhabist extremists anymore, which is why he's criticizing not only Israel in its attack, but also criticizing the behavior of Saudi Arabia.
Well, actually, Erdogan is tied to Saudi Arabia right now because he's letting the Saudis move their weapons to the ISIS and other terrorists in Iraq and Syria through Turkey. But I want to go back just to this question.
But he's still playing this game, though, and that game basically is going to get his political half-life is very short. If he continues playing this game, the people inside Turkey who are pragmatists will remove him from office, just like Ahmadinejad, who had a big mouth, continually saying he's going to destroy America. How ridiculous, when really he had no intention. This guy is like mentally ill, and at least the mullahs had 2 cents because they actually wanted to make a deal. They want to have a plastics industry. They want a petrochemical industry. They want to have exportation. They actually had a giant pipeline they finished 2 years ago to Turkey. The second largest gas producer on the planet is Iran. Iran doesn't want to have war. They don't want to be forced into a war where now they're going to be fighting ISIS and these other maniacs, supported by America, which will bring us in direct conflict with not only Iran. And Iran's response, if we start bombing their cities in the Bashar reactor, they'll hit us with EMP weapons, and they'll hit us with cyber terrorism because mathematics was invented by the Iranians. They will take us down to Chinatown. But even without the Russians, the Iranians can do us unbelievable damage. They have all the biopreparat weapons from the Soviet Union. They have top biological scientists. They have advanced drone technology. These people are no slouches. And if we try to take on Iran, which is half the size of the continental United States, we're going to get crushed in the Middle East. We're going to get crushed.
Well, look, let's go back a step, because I think what's essential is that people understand why the situation exists. And, I just did a series of classes on the origins of World War I and the comparison to today.
Exactly.
Now, there are a series of articles that are written by think tankers from both the left and the right who say that the parallels between World War I and now are based on 2 points.
Right.
One, World War I was caused by Germany, and World War III will be caused by China. Now, there's only 2 significant problems with that analysis. One is it's completely insane. Germany didn't start World War I. It was the British Empire going back to the 1890s that was terrified by German cooperation with France and Russia on railroads that threatened the control of the British of the deep sea transportation. Secondly, today, to say that China is an expansionist power as Germany was in World War I is ignoring the fact that we're putting a ring of bases and nuclear capabilities surrounding China, because the Obama administration and the British administration are committed to destroying China and Russia, because neither of those countries will go along with the global banking dictatorship that's coming out of London and Wall Street.
How many minutes do you think to destruction Beijing and Shandong and other major cities in China will be if we decide to push the button? Maybe 7 minutes, 8 minutes max. The reason is that Taiwan, if you actually look at Google Earth and look at a map, oh my gosh, it's right smack there within strike distance of all the dragon cities that are all the major manufacturing sites in China. There's nothing inland. It's all peasants.
We're also talking about buildups in the Philippines, in Japan. Now, the South Koreans have told us that South Koreans have said no, they don't want to be a part of it. But they might say that, but the fact is, I know from my inside contacts, South Korea has all our nuclear weapons and ability to access our space-based imaging. So does Japan, who's built up to the eyeballs. But what I'm saying is South Korea is orienting toward the BRICS right now because they want to survive economically.
Well, yeah, they know that. They know that what's happening is a realignment.
This is the key point. The parallel between pre-World War I and today is that before World War I, you had a declining empire. You had empires in Europe. You had the Russian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, but they were all collapsing internally. The British Empire decided to use that collapse of those 3 empires in the Balkans to launch a war once they had weakened France and Russia and got them into an alliance with Britain, which was called the Triple Entente. Now, today, the same British-American policy was to try to form strong alliances with every country surrounding Russia and China, to isolate Russia and China, and to use situations like the Chechen terrorists who were run out of London, the Ukrainian Nazis who overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine, and others to encroach on Russia and China.
Now, what we have today with Poroshenko, who's acting as an oligarch, and literally, these are like the modern reincarnation of the Nazis. These can out-Nazi the Nazis.
Now, what's important, though, is that while Obama and Cameron are talking about 25,000-person rapid deployment force in Eastern Europe, more weapons in Eastern Europe, expanding NATO eastward, they're even talking about NATO having a role in the Pacific. I didn't know the North Atlantic extended to the shores of Japan.
Wow.
But anyway, why are they doing this? Because they know their system is collapsing and they're trying to prevent an alternative from coming into being. But they're too late. The alternative, which is called the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, is getting more governments to support them. And what's interesting is that if you look at the ideas of infrastructure development, scientific work, China's mining the moon, things of that sort, for helium-3, what you find is that this coheres with outlines that Lyndon LaRouche has provided going back 25 and 30 years. And there are people in Russia and China who have studied LaRouche's ideas. Now, let me give you an example of the latest. You know, Egypt, which is a proud ancient civilization, for 200-something years has been destroyed by colonial powers. First the Ottomans, then the British Empire, and then once they got free, they were put under International Monetary Fund under Sadat and Mubarak. So you have Egypt, which has a large number of urban intellectuals and educated people who have a sense of a national history going back thousands of years, who have no jobs and no hope. It was literally crushed by the IMF. Now, out of nowhere, after Obama tried to impose a Muslim Brotherhood regime funded by Qatar in particular on Egypt, you had the nationalists and the military overthrow it. And they're building a new Suez Canal. They're doing it financed only by Egyptians. Egyptian jobs. They've created 15,000 jobs on this canal in the last week. They're going to employ 1 million people in high-tech irrigation connected to this canal project. And they're going to fund it entirely from credit from the Egyptian National Bank and bond sales to the Egyptian people. This is LaRouche's idea. And what did El-Sisi do? He refused to come to Washington to Obama's African summit and instead met with Putin to talk about increasing trade between Russia and Egypt.
There you go. It's literally like Obama is like the worst salesman of American foreign policy that ever existed. How's that? Unbelievable. Pretty bad. Pretty amazing. Hey, and these so we have these 3 articles that I'm going to be cutting and posting across. Obama has a problem. Fire Bonner, I love that article. Cooperation between Russia and Egypt expands rapidly following the Putin and El-Sisi summit. That's funny. It's actually, you could actually write this almost up as a comedy because it's not really. It seems negative, but in fact, it's actually quite humorous how incompetent the bankers in Obama. And they're fumbling everything. It's like you put them out, if they were out in football in the preseason, they would never get on the field for the regular season, would they? They're fumbling the ball. They look like a bunch of klutzes. And that's what's going on here now is Obama is so incompetent, he can fumble us into a world war or have the Tianjin Blue Army cybernetically shut off our power grid, or the Iranians, who, by the way, are next to Russia. They're the best in terms of cybernetic cyber warfare. We're going to be really screwed if we mess with Iran. And we're not even talking about adding Russia. If we add Iran, they have the medium-range missiles that can literally strike every city in Europe. And don't think the Europeans have got a space missile defense that's going to stop all these. I work with the guys working at White Sands Missile Base and also at Vandenberg Air Force Base and the U.S. Missile Defense Command. And I confronted them because my modus, and I say this on the show, is the most important thing, the pathway to bravery and to wisdom, is to, number 1, realize how ignorant you are, and number 2, realize bravery comes out of the questions you're willing to ask. And that's why I see Lyndon LaRouche is very brave, because he'd ask questions that other ones were too afraid to, because they knew the answer was easy to find. And when you found the answer, it compelled you to do something that would made sense, but it would cause a lot of trouble for you. And that's why he spent 5 years in prison.
Well, and it's also why he is admired by intellectuals and officials in Russia and China throughout the Middle East. You know, the guy who drafted the Suez Canal project that's underway, Fuad El-Baz, is someone who's done many interviews with the Executive Intelligence Review in the past.
Right.
So wherever you find people who are committed to developing their nation as a sovereign nation based on physical economic production,
right,
you find people who are interested in LaRouche as the world's premier physical economist.
Right.
And so what's not surprising at all is the fact that we're seeing these kinds of programs come into being. Now, at the same time, we're watching the West go through an extensive self-destruction. And, you know, when I say we're watching it, it's happening in front of us. You know, the fact that the stock market is up while physical production is dropping, while wages are dropping, while full-time jobs are collapsing.
And real inflation is expanding, but they've changed
are available for the average person to see.
Yeah, and what it does is change the way they interpret things. Unemployment is you're no longer getting benefits. So the real unemployment rate is not 6.75%, it's 24%. When we talk about the real economy, the middle-age income, this is the council and mayors, dropped 23% since 2008. That's ridiculous. And then we look at with a lot of the velocity of money.
And that's not reflected anywhere in government statistics, because the government lie is that the stock market going up proves that the economy is good. The occasional spurt in housing starts is sign of a strong economy. And then, of course, when it goes down for the next 3 months, no one says anything.
Well,
we're just lied to. Look, this is a Goebbels-style propaganda machine that we live under in the United States. And Americans are treated to this lie that it's left versus right. It's socialism versus Koch brothers. The reality is far different from that. We're under a banker's dictatorship. And the bankers, some of them are socialists, some of them are fascists, but what they agree on is don't touch their banks and the bad debt that they're holding.
Right. Well, what they're doing is, and these are the economic principles, they're reducing the velocity of money, they're contracting public credit, they're deflating the actual value of people's homes and pension funds, and they're creating a conflict where international commerce is sucking real business and real innovation away from countries that could innovate or even become stronger independent nations. One of the things that happened with the IMF and Egypt is they were told, no, you can't develop your own wheat industry, your own food industry, so you're self-sufficient, which they're quite capable of doing, which is why now they're moving in this direction of this new dam. Because they're basically saying, to hell with you, Europe and the IMF, we're going to become independent. We're going to have our own wheat and corn and other things.
And so the Indians just said the same thing, because they refused to go along with the World Trade Organization attack on so-called subsidies, and also the move to let Monsanto basically control all food supply and food production. India said no. South Africa said no. Argentina just said no to the vulture funds looting their country. So we're seeing a shift globally, and here's something Americans have to grasp. I really want to get in this point before the show's over. You know, in the past, it was U.S. domestic policy which shaped what happened in the world. Today, U.S. domestic policy is run by an insane puppet of the British, Obama, in collaboration with a completely impotent crybaby named John Boehner, who's working with Obama. Nothing's being done in the U.S. domestic politics. The action has shifted eastward to Russia, to China, to India, to Brazil, to South Africa. And we're left here with our pants down around our ankles, where our only role is to be the policeman for a British Empire policy in the Middle East. And Americans have to break out of that, and we have to get rid of Boehner and Obama as soon as possible, not after the elections in 3 months, but now.
We need to change their names to Tweedledee and Tweedledum. How's that?
Well, it's an insult to the Tweedledee and Tweedledum, but let's just
they
get
really
rid
are.
of it. Now, people who want to find out more about what we're doing on the Boehner-Obama front can call me at 800-922-2907. In the last couple of weeks, we haven't been getting calls, which leads me to believe that people are sleepwalking into disaster. So if you're not a sleepwalker, if you're a patriot, if you want to do something, call my office and get involved with us in these joint impeachment campaigns against Boehner and Obama. So it's 800-922-2907. I'll give that one more time, 800-922-2907.
Here's the urgency. If we don't solve this within 3 months, and I'm saying in 90 days, the chances are over 90 to 95% that there will be a collapse of the economy in Europe caused by the current dialogue and dialectic of conflict with Russia. That will collapse the European economy and it'll result in a bond market run and will result in martial law here in America, which Obama wants and the globalist bankers want. Whether it's Ebola or an economic bond run, they just are itching to put their Bearcats in every city, their militarized police everywhere, and to close down the internet and even in people asking questions. Because the real issue is, how does an economy or a world or a nation move forward? It's asking good questions and giving answers that make sense and are not damaging to people or the planet.
Here's the question LaRouche posed to us last night. What is necessary for the survival of mankind? That's what your business should be, to do what's necessary for mankind to survive. So if you consider yourself an honest, God-fearing patriot who wants to do something, call me at 800-922-2907, and let's have a discussion.
Now, you're going to Austria next week. Will you be available on the show, or is there someone else going to be coming on?
I'll let you know. I may be available. If not, I'll have one of my colleagues on with you.
Because of the time difference, you may be, because it's quite late in the evening, and I'm sure it'll be long after meetings.
Yeah.
But don't sleep. That's all. Just call in.
Who has time?
It's very important. You know, this hour is one of the most important of the week because people want to get a world perspective on what's going on, and they want to hear something positive, which is real solutions. Because a lot of people will whine about all the awful things: martial law, militarization of police, their jobs were lost, they lost their home. People are becoming doomsday preppers because the economy is shaky. That's not the answer, is to become just a doomsday prepper. Prepping should happen for everybody. You should have 3 weeks of food and water, should be ready for setting up a community if things really do collapse. But you should make it as remote as possible to happen. You shouldn't, basically speed the process of devolution of society. We should put a stop to it. And that means we should stop trying to bring conflict with us, with Iran and Russia, which will guarantee we're going to have an EMP if war first starts. We should protect our planet from near space objects and get new forms of energy that aren't going to boil water with fissionable materials and do things like Fukushima or have New Madrid blow up a bunch of plants and make the southeastern United States a radioactive dead zone. Like the zone around Chernobyl, the zone of alienation where only wild animals or mutant can survive. Not really a future you want. So if you want to change that future, call again, 800-922-2907. We'll get that OR nurse to put on the schedule 7:15 veinerectomy under local anesthesia. 8 o'clock, general anesthesia, Obamanectomy, multiple procedure levels requiring paralysis of the office of the executive branch, doing all kinds of illegal, unethical, and unconstitutional actions, and later a full Obamanectomy.
Sounds good to me.
Good plan and a schedule. Thank you, Harley.